Okay, introduction to printing production. Um, what is the first thing that comes into your mind, class, when you hear the word printing or printing production or any? What's the most famous name associated with printing? Anyone? Yes, Neil?
In print production, sir, like yung mga public materials na may design na pinopost
Okay.
sa labas for everyone to see, to inform, and ganun po.
Okay, that's right. So that's the first thing that comes into your mind when you hear the word printing production. And also another question, who is the most famous person that can be associated when you hear the word printing? I'm sure you have bumped into this name before. Okay, so no idea yet, so don't worry. We'll find out later. Who is the most famous person when associated with the word printing? Okay, so that's the. It says here that before printing was discovered, a century was equal to 8,000 years. Says by Henry David Thoreau. He is an American author and poet. So I think he's one of the most famous authors in United States, David Thoreau. So he said that before printing was discovered, a century was equal to 8,000 years. Why is that? Why do you think that as a century was equal to 8,000 years? We all know that. Okay, why do you think, less? Any idea? So we all know that a century is just 100 years. So sabi ni David Thoreau na without printing, a century is not 100 years, but 1,000 years. So medyo mabulaklak yung pananalita dito ni Henry David Thoreau. So without printing, instead of 100 years inside the century, it becomes 1,000 years. So that's how important is printing. Okay, oy, may nagtataas. Wait lang. Sino yun? What are your thoughts? Oh, yes, si Christopher.
Hi sir, good morning po. So, kung para po kasi sa akin, parang ibig sabihin po nito, parang mabagal yung mabagal yung pag-evolve ng technology. Parang kumbaga, kung alam printing, parang ang bagal niya, parang hindi siya bumibilis. Imbes na bumibilis siya, bumabagal pa siya. So parang yung century nagiging 1,000 years. Kasi ang bagal.
Alright. Okay, yes, mabagal kapag walang printing. Tama, tama. Thank you, JC. Yes, Charlene?
Ano po, parang hindi po updated lahat ng information ng time na yun po.
Okay, so hindi sila ma-update. Yung passing, yung parang passing of torch of information from one generation to one generation will become so disarranged or unorganized that the knowledge that should be passed just 100 years prior will become knowledge that passed 1,000 years ago without printing. So that's how important printing is. Okay, may gusto pa bang magbigay ng kanilang thoughts on how to interpret this passage by David Thoreau? Okay, so I think we can accommodate one more. So Albert?
Basically po sa yung learning po yung tinutukoy po dito, which is, nga, before printing, it would take us like 1,000 years po for us to learn about something na all at once. And now with printing, all of that 1,000 years will become only 100 years of learning. So,
Okay.
nga.
yes, the learning is what is being referred in this context, in your opinion, that um, will be delayed too much. Okay, sige, dali. Okay, so it is also noted that there was this before when the Library of Alexandria was burned. There is a like unwritten agreement of scholars, scientists, researcher that the knowledge of the earth was parang na-delayed ng 1,000 years because ng pagkasunog ng Library of Alexandria, where a lot of knowledge of that generation, of that era was, of course, ruined because of that fire of the Library of Alexandria was burned. So, na-delay daw tayo ng 1,000 years because of that certain event in history. Because of all of those books that was printed, was burned. So, yun. Sabi nga nung isang nakita ko na kung hindi lang daw nasunog yung Library of Alexandria, baka with the technology available right now, baka meron na tayong Disneyland sa moon. Okay? Sa buwan. Pero it sounds funny, pero possible naman yun. Kung hindi lang sana nasunog yung Library of Alexandria, meron na tayong Disneyland sa moon. Okay, now let's an overview. So there was this the pre-Gutenberg era of printing, and then there was this the Gutenberg era and the industrial, artistic, and digital. So that's the overview of what we will be tackling probably for the rest of the semester here in printing production. So we'll talk about the pre-Gutenberg. So sino ba si Gutenberg? I'm sure narinig niyo na siya. So si Johannes Gutenberg is the one who actually popularized and established the printing press. Okay, they literally press the letters to paper para ma-publish. So before ni Johannes Gutenberg na ma-popularize yung printing press, there was those being used, yung pagpipress ng mga characters sa isang medium was also being done already. But it is not as viable as what Johannes Gutenberg did. That's why we will discuss that. So pre-Gutenberg era is before 1400s. 15th century. So si Gutenberg, nabuhay siya from 1400s to 1468. So nabuhay siya ng 68 years old hanggang 68. Considering na yung panahon na yon is mababa lang yung lifespan. So at 68 years old during that time, mahaba na yon. Okay? So 1456 to 1760 is the Gutenberg era of printing production. And industrial is 1761 to 1890, and the artistic is from 1891 to 1983, and digital is 1984 to present. Okay, I'll have here a short video clip. So let's watch this first. Make sure you have your headset on. I'm sure this has audio. So again, if there is any issue with the audio and video, you can unmute and tell me so we can remedy it immediately. So mag-unmute kayo para baka pag nag-task kayo ng kamay, hindi ko rin ma-notice. Okay. Pag may issue sa audio. So I'll play it now.
What makes a book a book? Is it just anything that stores and communicates information? Or does it have to do with paper, binding, font, ink, its weight in your hands, the smell of the pages? Is this a book? Probably not. But is this? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the start of the book as we know it and understand how these elements came together to make something more than the sum of their parts. The earliest object that we think of as a book is the codex, a stack of pages bound along one edge. But the real turning point in book history was Johannes Gutenberg's printing press in the mid-15th century. The concept of movable type had been invented much earlier in Eastern culture, but the introduction of Gutenberg's press had a profound effect. Suddenly, an elite class of monks and the ruling class no longer controlled the production of texts. Messages could spread more easily, and copies could constantly be produced, so printing houses popped up all over Europe. The product of this bibliographic boom is familiar to us in some respects, but markedly different in others. The skeleton of the book is paper, type, and cover. More than 2,000 years ago, China invented paper as a writing surface, which was itself predated by Egyptian papyrus. However, until the 16th century, Europeans mainly wrote on thin sheets of wood and durable parchment made of stretched animal skins. Eventually, the popularity of paper spread throughout Europe, replacing parchment for most printings because it was less expensive in bulk. Inks had been made by combining organic plant and animal dyes with water or wine. But since water doesn't stick to metal type, use of the printing press required a change to oil-based ink. Printers used black ink made of a mixture of lamp soot, turpentine, and walnut oil. And what about font size and type? The earliest movable type pieces consisted of reversed letters cast in relief on the ends of lead alloy stalks. They were handmade and expensive, and the designs were as different as the people who carved their molds. Standardization was not really possible until mass manufacturing and the creation of an accessible word processing system. As for style, we can thank Nicholas Jensen for developing 2 types of Roman font that led to thousands of others, including the familiar Times Roman. Something had to hold all this together, and until the late 15th century, covers consisted of either wood or sheets of paper pasted together. These would eventually be replaced by rope fiber millboard, originally intended for high-quality bindings in the late 17th century, but later as a less expensive option. And while today's mass-produced cover illustrations are marketing tools, the cover designs of early books were made to order. Even spines have a history. Initially, they were not considered aesthetically important, and the earliest ones were flat rather than rounded. The flat form made the books easier to read by allowing the book to rest easily on a table. But those spines were damaged easily from the stresses of normal use. A rounded form solved that issue, although new problems arose, like having the book close in on itself. But flexibility was more important, especially for the on-the-go reader. As the book evolves and we replace bound texts with flat screens and electronic ink, are these objects and files really books? Does the feel of the cover or the smell of the paper add something crucial to the experience? Or does the magic live only within the words, no matter what their presentation?
Pay attention, class, with our discussion, because after the discussion, I will send a link, that will serve as your attendance, okay? And that will only open 4 or 5 minutes after we end the session, okay? So let's say natapos tayo ng 11, then I'll send the link ng 11, then 11:05 we'll close the link submission, and you will just need to write your name in there, and there is a very short question, okay, that will be answered, that you need to answer. Just one question, then you need to answer, coming from this discussion, of course, okay, so that we'll see that you actually pay attention in our discussion. All right, so okay ba yan, class? Can you give me a thumbs up? for attendance purposes, and just one very simple question coming from this discussion. All right. Thank you for confirming. So before Johannes Gutenberg invented the, I would like to say not 100% invented, because previous culture, especially in Eastern Asia, Eastern culture in China and Korea already did what Johannes Gutenberg did with the printing press. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So as you can see, that the characters are fixed into the press and it is not movable. So that's where the printing press will comes in. So let's have an overview. Let's start with the pre-Gutenberg era, before 1455. So characteristics of the pre-Gutenberg era are books were hand copied one at a time. Okay, so before, of course, if you want a book, mostly monks are doing, the priests are writing it manually, character by character, they are writing it up. So it will really take time to come up with one particular book. So books were hand copied one at a time. So lahat yan. So here on the rightmost part of your screen is one page of a Bible where it was written, okay, manually, through handwritten, yung mga libro before the Gutenberg era. Another characteristics is information was slow to disseminate. So yun nga, ang nakakapag-produce lang ng probably isang libro sa isang buwan ang napoproduce. So it's very slow yung process na yon. And also another characteristics that books limited to upper class of people who could afford and were literate. So majority of the people who cannot afford a book have no idea, okay, cannot read and write before the Gutenberg era. And of course, since it's very hard to come by and to create, books are very much cherished. Okay? So walang, ngayon lang may nagkaroon ng surplus or oversupply ng mga books to the point na we can find a book for free and for very cheap. Right? We can get any books that we want. Also, class trivia. What is the most stolen book ever? You can type in the chat box if you know the answer. Ang pinaka prone sa stealing na libro. What do you think? Yes, correct, Sydney. So, ayon sa survey, ang pinaka most stolen book in history is the Bible. Okay, now the Gutenberg era. Let's proceed to the Gutenberg era. 1456 to 1760. So book printing flourished. So nag-boom yung pagpiprint ng book during the Gutenberg era. So this is what it looks like. Output ng printing galing sa Gutenberg printing press machine. Information dissemination rapidly increased. So of course, medyo naging madali na yung pag-print ng libro, of course, the information. Nag-reach na sa mga kahit mga lower middle class, okay, or middle class population. It reaches also that. Um, and books were not limited to the upper class of society. And yun nga, even lower middle class or middle class have access to books already. So that's the Gutenberg era. Next is the industrial era of printing. So book volumes and production times were speeded up by mechanical automation. So as soon as yung printing press na nabahiran ng element ng steam engine. So imagine before, di ba? Manually pinipress nila sa paper yung ink, yung characters sa para yun nga, ma-press. Then nung nagkaroon ng steam engine, mas naging automatic pa yung yung printing. Type was manufactured with more precision, durability, and speed. Delivery was expedited by better transit, improved roads, rail, and sea. Okay, so ito na talaga yung first printing and first industrial revolution. So yun, para silang nagkaroon ng collaboration, collab. Printing X first industrial revolution. So yun yun. So this is what printing looks like during the 18th century. Next, ito na yung medyo modern. 1891 up until just before the digital era. So characteristics are technical improvements, allowed for more sophisticated and analog production pa din, though it's more of a hindi pa siya digital in a context that it's still analog way of printing it. Okay, more and easier use of images integrated with text, photo production, reproduction of words and images, sped up mass communication, assembly, and delivery. So if you're familiar with this kind of graphics, it has that World War I, World War II vibes type of printing. Okay, so that's the graphics that is during that era. Then right after that artistic era, we have the, one moment, I think, just a second. Ano nangyari sa PowerPoint? Nawala yung digital. Okay, so I'll probably just leave it on our next discussion. So ano lang, just after the artistic era of printing press, next to this is 1984 up to present. Okay, so kasi 1984, that was the time where they start the widespread use of personal computer. Okay, yung Apple II, okay, yung Mac. Na this is the time that where it is yung Windows 1, yun na yun, yung start ng digital era of printing. So yung pinaka-importanting tao sa when it comes to, it's almost synonymous to printing press, is none other than Johannes Gutenberg. Okay, so he is really the proprietor of the printing press. So it says here that movable type had been used about 500 years before Gutenberg in Korea and China, but it wasn't viable. Why is it not viable? Because, why do you think, class, that is it not viable? So ito yung ganito yung itsura ng ng printing press sa China and Korea. Nasa left side, ito sa gitna. Or ito. Yan yung itsura ng printing press sa China. 500 years before Gutenberg actually popularized, invented the printing press. Why is it not viable, class? Ano yung characteristic ng characters, Chinese characters compared to sa characters natin? Ano yung pinaka-striking differences? What do you think? Bakit hindi siya naging viable? Kasi kung naging viable siya, we can provide credit to the Chinese about the printing press. Why is it not viable for them? The reason is that if you can notice that our alphabet only consists of at least 26 characters. Okay, but in China, their characters can reach up to more than 2,000 characters. Can you imagine that? 2,000 Chinese characters. That's why hindi siya nag-boom. Okay? They can do that, but it's too laborious and it's too not viable to actually change an industry. Okay, so that's the main difference. More than 2,000 yung Chinese characters. Well, compared to us, we can just simply, para lang tayo naglalaro ng Scrabble. Parang lang nag-i-Scrabble si Johannes Gutenberg during that time. Kasi there are only at least 26 characters in our alphabet compared to 2,000 characters of Chinese characters. So that's the reason why it's actually Gutenberg who popularized the printing press. Okay? So clear ba yun? So yun lang yung pinaka-reason. Ang Chinese characters is my 2,000 characters compared to the our alphabet, which is at least 26 characters on. Okay? Can you give me a thumbs up if that is clear? That's why it wasn't viable during that time. Okay, so thank you for confirming that. So that's the only reason. There are only more than 2,000 characters in China. Next is the main problem was the huge number of characters. Ito nga, 2,000 plus in these languages that took considerable time to set up on each page. So syempre, imagine nyo naman, Scrabble, tapos 2,000 characters yung siguro mga 2 drum ng ng brick yung kailangan yung isali sa laro yung Scrabble. So it's too complicated. Yes, that's correct. So sabi ni Kim, it's too complicated for them to rearrange each character to come up with a book. Okay. So that's why it didn't really change the industry. The way Johannes Gutenberg printing press changed the entire printing industry. Next is that Gutenberg was able to combine his knowledge of print manufacturing, a small alphabet, and the abundance of paper to prove printing was sustainable. So medyo hinog na din. The world is ready for a printing press during that time. Okay? So all of those factors was combined and he is able to come up with that. So abundance na yung ink, yung oil needed para dumikit yung ink sa paper, and yung lead para mahulma yung mga letters. So lahat yon naging suddenly readily available, that the perfect storm for a printing press was formed in a positive way. So yun. He knew about pressing equipment, metal alloys for durable type letters, type mold making, and ink formulation to get ink to stick on the metal type so he could succeed in the process. So yun. That's just an overview on how Gutenberg actually invented the printing press. So this is Johannes Gutenberg. Okay, so he was born in 1400 and he died in 1468. Is the inventor of the printing press. So here's a video that I want you to watch. Okay, you need to watch this about the Johannes Gutenberg. Okay, so can you give me a thumbs up if you are ready? Right. So pay attention again in this video because it might come here the question in our attendance.
One-off, but for most people in the Middle Ages, this was an academic problem. They couldn't read or write anyway. During the Middle Ages, books were written out by hand, mostly in monasteries. Often the monks would spend years on a work. Then, in 1450, an invention changed the world. In the German city of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg invented the technique of printing with movable type. This made it possible to duplicate books in large numbers and at relatively low cost. The technological foundation was laid for the intellectual, political and religious changes of the succeeding centuries. Johannes Gensfleisch, who later changed his name to Gutenberg, was born in Mainz in around 1400. His father was a wealthy merchant. Young Johannes attended the monastic school in Mainz, that much we know, but then his trail goes cold for a while. We only pick it up again in Strasbourg, where he settled in 1434. Here he set up a factory that produced mirrors for pilgrims. These were very popular among the faithful, who hoped thereby to capture something of the charisma emanating from the shrine they were visiting and from the relics it contained. For Gutenberg, it was a lucrative business. There was a flourishing trade in devotional objects. Particularly popular were woodcuts depicting the saints. Woodcut is one of the earliest printing techniques, but it only reached Europe in the early Middle Ages. Here it served primarily for the dissemination of pictures and texts. But cutting these whole-page blocks is a time-consuming process. First, a mirror image of the handwritten page has to be drawn on the block. Then the individual letters have to be carved out. Finally, the block is inked in, and the sheet of paper is laid on top and rubbed hard with a bone tool so that it takes up the ink. By the start of the 15th century, more and more of these page prints were coming onto the market. Occasionally, a number of pages were bound into a book. The trade in these books also gave a boost to manuscript production. Manuscripts had long since ceased to be the exclusive preserve of the monasteries. Secular scribes were doing good business. The establishment of the first universities had created a great demand for books. Libraries were founded, making knowledge in the form of books accessible. Books needed to be cheaper and more quickly available, but that wasn't all. In particular, scholars wanted uniform copies. A new production technique was feverishly sought after. And one of the seekers was Gutenberg. In 1446 he returned to Mainz. Here he found solid financial backers, allowing him to go ahead with his enterprise. His breakthrough came with a brilliant idea. He broke up his text into its constituent parts: letters, punctuation marks, and frequent combinations known as ligatures. These were then combined to form the blocks for printing words, lines and pages. The characters were cast and could be used in new combinations time and again. A character is produced as follows. On the end of a metal rod, a mirror image of the letter is engraved. This is then pushed into softened copper, producing a pit in the shape of the letter. This matrix, as it's called, acts as the mould for the actual type, which is cast from lead. In order to manufacture the many letters needed quickly and in sufficient quantity, Gutenberg took another important step forward, inventing the hand-casting instrument. It consists of a rectangular channel. The matrix is inserted at one end and molten lead poured into the other. When the instrument is opened, a letter cast in lead is there, ready to be used. As the matrix is reusable, an unlimited number of identical letters can be cast. Finally, the typesetter can begin to combine the letters into lines. In the form, the lines or columns are combined to create the page layout as desired. The result is a mirror image of the page to be printed. The form is now inked in with printer's ink. Gutenberg used a mixture of lampblack varnish and egg white. Printing can now start. Gutenberg used a special press for this purpose, but he derived the principle from the traditional wine press. Gutenberg's first printed works were official documents, papal decrees, and grammars. But soon he started on a mammoth venture, the Latin Bible. For this project he cast more than 100,000 pieces of type. For more than 2 years, Gutenberg's typesetters and printers worked on the first edition of 180 copies. The text was printed in black letter or Gothic type, based on the handwriting of the day. Finally, the illuminator added the coloured initials and drawings. With his Bible, one of the world's most beautiful printed books, Gutenberg proved that a work printed with movable type could be as aesthetically pleasing as one written by hand. The edition was soon sold out. Gutenberg's contemporaries were impressed. It was the first time a work had been available in such a large edition, and every copy was identical. The written word now had authoritative status. Knowledge of this revolutionary technology was quick to spread. Soon the first printing presses were set up in Cologne, Bamberg and Basel. In Venice, an enterprising publisher named Aldus Manutius began to print the works of the classical authors. His clientele comprised the whole of Europe's humanistic intellectual elite. Manutius employed the most talented printers of the age. They developed the typeface known as Antiqua, which soon spread throughout Europe. "20 years after Gutenberg's invention, the new technology was firmly established. Thousands of titles were marketed in editions of up to 1,000. Books now became affordable for ordinary people. As society grew more literate, the number of potential readers increased. One of Gutenberg's greatest admirers was the reformer Martin Luther. The new art of printing gave him a bright and bold idea. The layman didn't need a priest to tell him what the Bible said. He could read it himself and decide for himself between revealed truth and the false interpretation put about by the church. So Luther had more than 500,000 copies of his German translation of the Bible printed, a huge number for those days. And to disseminate his Protestant message, he had hundreds of thousands of leaflets distributed. But it wasn't just Luther who exploited the new medium. So did the emperor, along with kings and free cities of the empire. Soon, single-sheet leaflets, flyers we would call them, were discovered as a news medium. When an unusual configuration of planets was announced for 1524, the country faced an avalanche of these flyers, warning of an imminent repeat of Noah's flood. The first daily newspaper appeared in Leipzig in 1650. Einkommende Zeitungen it was called, roughly breaking news, and it came out 6 days a week. But the triumphal march of the newspaper did not really begin until steam-powered rotary printing presses appeared in the 19th century. And the offset process ushered in a radical transformation of printing technology. Now the printing and non-printing elements are part of a single continuous surface. First, the page to be printed is transferred by exposure to light onto a thin printing plate. Then the plate is moistened with water so that the non-printing areas do not absorb any ink. Next, the printing ink is applied. This has a greasy element and it adheres to the areas previously exposed to light. In the offset process, the ink is not transferred directly from the form to the paper, but is first offset onto a rubber roller, hence the name, and only then onto the paper. This allows for rapid printing, and lower quality paper can also be used. Offset is the commonest printing process in use today, but in spite of all these modern developments, it was Johannes Gutenberg who laid the foundations of our modern media world. His invention is still regarded as one of the most important in human history. Gutenberg himself did not make a fortune with his invention. He'd not even finished printing his Bible before his financial backer called in the loan. In the legal battle that followed, Gutenberg lost not only his printing press, but also all the Bibles he'd already printed. Soon afterwards, Mainz was occupied by hostile troops. Gutenberg had to go into exile. 3 years later, he was allowed back as an employee of the new archbishop. On the 3rd of February 1468, Johannes Gutenberg died. He was buried in the Franciscan church in Mainz. But his invention of printing with movable type had changed the world forever. One-off.
Okay. So there in class, that's the overview of our first day in print production. So later, may schedule pa kayo sa akin pero hindi ko na kayo meet for the video production. Okay, so next meeting natin is Tuesday na. Okay, for the call center basics. Okay, and after that, we'll meet again on Thursday for the print production again. Okay, so yun lang class ang ating first meeting for today's session since this is the first meeting. Do you have any questions? Alright, sige. Kala ko sa shock react na naman si Jimon. Okay. So there, kindly open your, wait lang. Send ko na pala yung ano. Sige, pagkatapos at may picture, saka ko isi-send yung link. So you can open it somewhere else. Copy, make a copy. Okay, so open your webcam. Prepare to open your webcam. So, all right, so 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. Ay, wait, dalawang page pala to. One moment. Okay. Second page. 1, 2, and smile. Okay. Just a moment. And the link, don't go yet. The link for the attendance is here. Okay, so you have 10 minutes to answer that. So 10:35, 10:36 is magpa-close na yan. So there. That's the attendance. Okay. So as soon as you got the attendance, you can now leave this meeting. And goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.